Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Diana Buttu, who is a human rights lawyer, former Palestinian peace negotiator, who joins us from Haifa in Israel. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I just want to start by asking you, obviously it's been an extremely violent 48 hours in Gaza, a very high death toll. And as someone who's lived in Gaza, I just want to ask you what goes through your mind when you look at images of people in Gaza and seeing what they're going through at the moment.
All that I can think about is genocide. And all I can think about is my friends and the places that I lived in when I was in Gaza. From what I know of when I've spoken to my friends today, we've got the vast majority of the population is now confined to about 19 or 20% of the Gaza Strip. That means that people are living on top of one another. It was already the most densely populated place on earth. Add to that the Israelis are bombing this 19 or 20% that remains, and as well, they're starving them. So the combination of them living with complete insecurity, no place is safe, living on top of one another, with no food, no water, no sanitation, and then constantly being bombed, there's no other word for it other than genocide, and I think it's time for the world to acknowledge this.
And we are told that 107 aid trucks did get in on Sunday. I just want to ask you what you're hearing from your contacts on the ground, is any of that reaching people that need it the most? Or is that just a trickle that's addressing perhaps one small section of the Gaza Strip?
It's what the UN calls a teaspoon of aid. And the reason that they're calling it a teaspoon of aid is because, first and foremost, Israel shouldn't be blocking aid to begin with. This isn't Israel's to be blocking. This is aid that is coming in from members of the international community who don't believe in genocide, who do think that Palestinians should have the right to live. And moreover, on a normal day before all of this began, before the genocide began, there was an average of 600 to 700 trucks needed daily to get into the Gaza Strip. Now, that's at a time when people were still able to live off of the land. They were still able to grow. They were still able to plant things. They were still able to fish. They were still able to keep their own cattle, their own livestock. Today, we're talking about a need that is tenfold of what is being allowed in. And not only is it not being allowed in, it's being allowed in as a teaspoon, but it's actually not reaching the places where it needs to go. The only supplies that Israel has allowed in so far is flour, a little bit of baby formula, and some medical supplies. That's not enough to sustain life. And that's exactly what the point is. Israel wants to keep committing genocide. It's made it clear that it intends to starve Gazans. And the only reason that it's allowing this trickle, this teaspoon in, is because of the international condemnation that it's been receiving.
Do you get the impression as someone who lives in Israel that international condemnation that you mentioned, and it is coming from far and wide, it's coming from Europe, it's coming from the Middle East, it's even coming from the United States, and the Trump administration is not looking quite as friendly to Prime Minister Netanyahu as some might have thought a few weeks ago. Is that message getting through?
It is, and yet at the same time, you still have a population that thinks that it's okay to carry out genocide. And so on the one hand, while they are hearing the condemnation and the criticism, they're able to slough it off as just somehow that they have the right to do this. And so this is the problem, is that the words need to be backed by deeds. Yes, we've heard condemnations, but so far the average Israeli is not paying the price. We haven't seen that there has been a cutoff of free trade agreements or of trade agreements in general. We haven't seen that Israelis have been barred from traveling to places. We haven't seen that anything has happened to them. Life for them is normal, and so for them it's very easy to just push it off and just to dismiss any international condemnation. But it's more than that that's happening in Israel. It's also that we see that Israelis themselves have taken to the streets to try to block these aid trucks from entering. And we've seen that there have been Israelis that have gone down to the edge of the Gaza Strip and are holding barbecues in order so that Palestinians who live in Gaza can smell the barbecues that they are making. And so it's a society that has not yet gotten the message that genocide is not acceptable. This is why it's so urgent for the world to be acting.
But you're not talking about all Israelis, are you? You're talking about a certain percentage of the population.
I wish I could say that it was a small percentage of the population, but it's not. A very high percentage of the population still believes in supporting this genocide. Those who are opposed to the war are opposed only because they want to see the return of the Israelis, not out of any love for Palestinians or loathing of genocide. The protests that we've seen have not been anti-genocide protests. There have been protests that are simply calling for the Israeli government to end the war, but not anything beyond that. This is the tragedy, is that the way that this country was created, the way that Israel was created, was through the dehumanization of Palestinians. It's the only way that you could take over somebody else's land, that you could live in somebody else's house. And that dehumanization process has been allowed to fester for 77 years, to the point where you see that Israelis, everyday Israelis, are not really calling for the end to genocide, but instead are simply supporting the war. If there was a huge push to end this genocide, it would have ended long ago. If Israelis were feeling the pain, the international pain, then this would have ended long ago. But unfortunately, the world's not doing anything, and Israelis left to their own devices are simply not going to end it.
So what sort of conversations do you have there in Israel, in your daily life, with the people you encounter? What's the tone of a conversation you would have with an ordinary person in a taxi or on the street in Israel?
That's a great question, Tom. Look, a lot of it centers on them trying to either deny the Nakba or to be an apologist for the Nakba. This is the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948. And similarly, it's the case when it comes to denying this genocide or being an apologist for this genocide. I simply don't understand how somebody can condone the killing of 16,000 kids and the starvation of 2 million people. And yet this is what it's like to live here on a day-to-day basis. We are to be blamed for our own deaths. We're to be blamed for the ethnic cleansing of our country. We're to be blamed for genocide. And that, of course, is certainly not healthy, which is why this pressure must come from outside, just as it did when it came to Nazi Germany. The way that that ideology ended was through a wholesale program of explaining to people who supported the Nazis that this is not okay, that genocide is not acceptable in this day and age.
In a recent article, you're quoted as saying you're sometimes asked by people in Gaza, and they say, listen, Diana, you live in Israel. What do Israelis say about what they're doing in Gaza? That's what people in Gaza are asking you as someone who lives in Israel. I'm just wondering how you answer that question. How do you respond?
I try not to. And the reason I try not to is because for my friends who are living in Gaza, they're looking for hope. They're looking for a means to stay alive. And if I tell them the honest truth, the truth is actually a very painful one. On a day-to-day basis, I hear Israeli politicians openly calling for starvation, and then, of course, denying that they're starving people. I hear on a day-to-day basis them calling for Gaza to be burned. We just heard a member of the Knesset, the parliament, say this just a few weeks ago and did not get any consternation. There was no condemnation in the Knesset for saying so. On a daily basis, I hear cultural figures, public figures, talking about how Palestinians should be starved, how there are no innocents, how even children are legitimate targets. But of course, this is not the conversation that I want to be having with my friends in Gaza, because I don't want them to feel that the world has abandoned them. They already feel as though the world has abandoned them. So sometimes I do tell them the truth, but it's always a truth that I try to kind of soften, because I don't want people in Gaza to feel the wrath that I live on a day-to-day basis of Israelis who are openly calling for genocide, who are openly saying that it's okay to kill kids. And it's such a devastating place to be living in, and such a devastating mindset that you see people, whether they're young or old, thinking that it's okay to carry out genocide, and that they're legitimate, that it's legitimate to do so.
I mean, you say the world has forgotten them, but I mean, it sounds from where I sit like there is something of a crescendo when it comes to the condemnation of what's happening in Gaza. And it's coming from far and wide. It's coming from Germany. It's coming from many countries in the Arab world. It's coming from the United Kingdom. It's coming from France, most notably from the president himself. Even some would say coming from the Trump administration. I mean, does that how it sounds to you? Does it sound like we've reached a point of condemnation that we have perhaps never got to before?
You know, Tom, we have reached a point of condemnation where we've got, but it's taken, look how long it's taken. It's taken the killing of more than 54,000 Palestinians that we know of.
Right, it's taken 20 months.
Not the indirect deaths. But, and the flattening of Gaza, there's nothing left. In places like Rafah, there's not even a single house left. 90% of the buildings have been totally decimated. So yes, there's a crescendo in the condemnations, but we haven't yet begun to see any action. And this is the part that is so devastating. We already have three decisions by the International Court of Justice. We already have indictments that have been issued for Netanyahu, for Gallant. I'm not sure why they haven't been issued for Israel Katz, the current defense minister. We have all of these mechanisms that are available to hold Israel to account, and yet nothing has been done. So while, yes, there are statements, the statements alone are not bringing an end to the bombs.
I just want to ask you about one other issue for which you've been in the newspapers in recent days, certainly in the United Kingdom, because you issued a video online. It was shared by the football commentator, ex-England captain Gary Lineker, who stepped down from a BBC show as a consequence. His last show was yesterday, I believe, on Sunday. How do you feel about how all of that played out?
Well, the reason that there was so much attention brought to the video is not because of the video itself. And what was very important is that Lineker did not condemn the video or the content of the video in which I describe what it's like as a Palestinian to be living under Zionism. And I describe very quickly what Zionism is about. The reason that he ends up stepping down was because somebody had attached an emoji to the video. And so I stand very much by the content of the video. I wasn't the person who added the emoji, and neither was he, obviously. And so the point is that people are trying to somehow dismiss the content of the video in which I talk about what Zionism is about, which is the theft of land, and trying to claim it as their own. But they can't dismiss that. And because they can't dismiss that, because it's truthful, they then go after the emoji that neither I nor Mr. Lineker put on the video itself.
But you do understand the uproar and the anger and the sort of the connotations of that rat emoji. I mean, do you condemn it?
I didn't put the rat emoji on it, and so
but you condemn the fact that someone did.
Anything to. There's nothing that I have to deal with it. It's very interesting. I'm always asked to condemn the actions of other people rather than the actions of my own. I'm a person who is very clear when it comes to anti-Semitism. I have no place for it in my life. I don't think there's any place for it in the world. And the fact that this emoji ended up being put on it is obviously very unfortunate. But that's the whole point: is that people are trying to detract from the actual message and focus on the emoji rather than focusing on the message itself.
Let's turn our focus back to Gaza specifically and what's happening at this very moment. You've talked about sort of inaction, inaudible voices from world leaders, hollow promises. Specifically, who would you like to be saying and doing what?
I would love for the international community as a community to come forward and be imposing economic sanctions on Israel. I would love for the United States, which provides Israel with 69% of its weaponry, to be stopping that weaponry as is required under both international and U.S. law. I would love for Germany and Italy, the other two countries, and the UK, the other two countries that provide Israel with its weaponry to also be halting their weapons supply. And I would love to see that Israel be held to account, including Israeli leaders, for everything that they have said and done. You know, Tom, what's been interesting throughout the past 20 months is that Israeli leaders have made it absolutely no secret that they intend to commit genocide. They've made it clear that they want to make the Gaza smaller in size. They've made it clear that they want to make it thinner in population. They've made it clear that they intend to starve Gaza. These are not statements that I'm making up. These are their own statements. And they've been carried out in terms of actions as well. What's shocking to me is that even though the Israelis have made this clear, that the world seems to be somehow incapable of doing what's necessary. And what's necessary is an arms embargo. What's necessary is boycotting Israel. What's necessary is placing sanctions on Israel. And what's necessary is holding these leaders and their soldiers to account for the genocide, as has been the case in other examples of genocide around the world.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. We're out of time, but it's been a real pleasure talking to you. We really appreciate your time. Diana Buttu,
My pleasure.
thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.